Good morning. Now, David apologized. He'll come later today or tonight. And this work is built on David's work. It's 2 decades and plus that he has been working on the bioeconomy. And we have constructed this presentation together. What we wanted to basically tell, or basically following what he's doing, is what is the bioeconomy? Let's start. First, let's understand what are we doing here? What is the industry we're trying to understand? And when we look at the bioeconomy, we have several definitions. One of them is that it's process-based, is that economic activity derived from scientific and research analysis that focuses on mechanisms and processes at the genetic and molecular level. An alternative definition is an input-based one, and that looks at economic activity based on utilization and processing of living organisms and systems. The one that actually David likes, and we'll stick with throughout this presentation, is that the bioeconomy consists of economic activity that rely on biological processes that produce, and this is important, economic value. That can include agriculture, agrotourism, that can include biotechnology, both for medical and agriculture uses, bioenergy, and green chemistry. Now, when we look at the bioeconomy, we're trying to characterize the picture on the right. We have the farmers, we have the industry, we have the byproducts, we're trying to create more value, and we have the renewables. So what do we use the bioeconomy for? The bioeconomy uses parts of the economy that employ renewable biological resources from land to sea and sea to produce food, feed, material, chemical fuels. We use crops, forests, fish, animals, and so forth. And this is going to be the first part of the day today. We're going to see people talking about the industries, how the various feedstock have been utilized to create value, as well as to create a more sustainable industries with impact both on the environment and on our economy. And creating or looking for a sustainable solution or sustainable outcome. And these are the objectives that I think most of us, if not all of us, have in mind when we start talking about the bioeconomy. Potentially the bioeconomy can be one of the building blocks that will bring us into environmental sustainability. It can reduce resource dependence on non-renewables towards renewables. It can alleviate, and this is again a debate that we're all having, or some of us are having, alleviate the climate change effects. It can mitigate local pollution, but it can also address some other objectives that we have, like food security. It can increase food availability. It can improve nutritional intake, food safety, and, which is a topic that is much closer to my area, it can promote energy security, cheap energy, and result in domestic energy production. When we want to put it in a historical context, what happened is that we had major technological and science breakthroughs that changed the way of life and how we produce and what we consume. We are in the midst, and David has been talking about it for the last decade or so, of a new, as well as many others, it's not unique, but about the new molecular biology and genetic revolution. The discovery of genetic codes and power information technology leads to the modern bioeconomy. It results in new medicine, it results in crop varieties that we can use them for various products, from energy to plastics, bioplastics. It can result in science that is developed by the economic and industrial complex, and we'll say a bit more about it as we move along. The bioeconomy, or the old one, is not a new thing. This is something that has been here for a very long time. Fermentation has been used to create cheese, wine, bread, beer, pickling, and kimchi, which is a South Korean dish. It's something that we have been utilized for a long time, but something happened lately that resulted in the bioeconomy rising up again. Why is it relevant today? What happened suddenly? As we mentioned, there are very important advancements in biology science, molecular biology, and genetic revolution. We also have improved substantially our ability, both horizontally and vertically, in utilizing the various feedstocks, which is the whole idea behind the biorefinery. And we'll have people talking about it later during the day. Increase in inter and intra-industry trade, we're impacting the supply chain. The allocation of market power becomes important, and that has a huge impact on innovation, and this will have some people talk, including David, tomorrow morning about. Globalization, we all know about, and the challenge of climate change basically increased demand for us striving to find new sources or more sustainable structure and industries to support our way of living with reducing our impact on the environment, while reducing our impact on the environment. Now, based on David's work throughout the years, major restructuring towards sustainable development should include multidisciplinary knowledge, which is what this school is about and what many of the schools that you guys are coming from is about, as well as we see the industry. You need to approach various disciplines, and that's an important part in the promotion of the bioeconomy as we understand. We need natural sciences, we need agricultural science, and we need social science. It's not enough to create the technology, we also need to adopt it. So these disciplines need to work together. We need to emphasize the importance of efficiency. U.S. corn ethanol, a third of the value created is through DDGS. Brazilian sugarcane used by gas for electricity, and we can find numerous other examples, and throughout the day we'll hear about some of them. And an important part when we start talking about the bioenergy, specifically displacing liquid fuels in transportation sector, I think is not likely when you start looking at the primary family vehicle in suburban and local and rural locales. Long-haul freights and passengers, I don't think it's moving soon towards electricity, and I don't see many people traveling on solar-driven planes. And this is important because this basically says if we want to move away from fossil fuels, we need to find an alternative for these places, for these industries, for these consumptions. And we need to search for that. And we need to understand how we want to move forward in trying to find solution to these specific industries. This is not mine, this is taken from Paul Bryan. He did a calculation. He wanted to know what's the dollar value per a common unit of energy. And this kind of gives an interesting picture and explains to some degree why we see the current developments of the bioeconomy and what is becoming likely more commercialized than others. These is fine chemicals. And this is the value per unit of energy. As you move, this is not supposed to surprise you, this is coal. But what's also interesting is electricity. The value is 31. If you look at wood pellet that can be utilized for electricity, their value is $6. So when you start looking at the efficiency, the economic development, the commercialization of many of these industries, when you convert it to a common energy unit, and again, that was done by Paul Bryan, it gives us some better understanding about the economics and the flow of those industries and their development into commercialization from the pilot stage. We want to understand the bioeconomy. And again, many of those topics will be covered during today's sessions. We want to understand the direct and indirect effects of the bioeconomy. We want to understand it because we want to understand what value does it create to us. And how much does it reduce the reliance on non-renewables? How far can we push that envelope? Now, there are other types of direct and indirect effects that we're less certain about, or they're less clear-cut. Some example is the impact on farm sector welfare and overall welfare. People that grow the staple crop versus those that grow the livestock and they consume the feedstock that is being impacted by prices. Reducing externality, again, the whole debate about the impact on greenhouse gases. Energy security impacting fuel prices, we'll discuss a bit about more today later on, and its effect on the balance of trade. Now, I find these topics very important because when you promote a policy, it needs to pay off to politicians, and politicians value very much the employment and the expansion and prices. And so these are parameters that we want to understand how the development of the industry will impact, because that will create more or less favoring or opposing the industry. Now, when we're doing that, there are challenges in measuring the impacts. Outputs of the bioeconomy may be renewables, but it relies on non-renewable inputs, fertilizers. Other example, overall greenhouse gas emission, other externalities of new products may actually end up being higher, not lower. And this brings us to sessions in basically tomorrow morning, where we're trying to understand, we're trying to create tools to measure the bioeconomy, because it's important for us to understand its impact, to understand how do we want to push the industry forward, what type of policy we want to develop. This will be impacted by the development of big data. To assess environmental effects, we will need to conduct a life cycle analysis. We'll introduce new markets, and we'll have people talking about it tomorrow. We need to quantify the price of delay, which is very important. And again, others will talk about it tomorrow. But these parameters are very important because it's important to understand the impacts. And we need to develop those tools because they're not yet developed. We also need to be a bit more careful when we start talking about indirect land use. It goes both ways. I just gave one example, a paper that argued that there is actually massive underutilization of land in Brazil. So we should be careful how we quantify indirect land use. Estimates will improve over time, and I'll argue that later on today. And I think it's in part because we have better data, in part because we do have learning. And very importantly, and this is an argument made by David very vehemently, we need to improve food productivity. We need to improve production, and we need to put the priority of the poor up front. So in that sense, when you move towards the bioeconomy, you develop new products. If you're increasing the price to the poor and imposing further hardship on the poor, there is a problem in the solution we're finding. When we develop that, and this goes to what people will talk about tomorrow a bit, not too much, we don't have a lot of this part, but we need to develop knowledge. We need to generate knowledge. And there are various complexes, industrial complexes that have been discussed in the literature. There's the university knowledge, the startup developed, the multinational products. But it's very important to maintain the strong universities. The reason you want them, both they're creating the research, the basic knowledge, but they're also creating the human capital that is then later on moving to the industry and developing the industry. There's also complementary development of knowledge within the industries, and that is acquisition. One example is the Chinese agribusiness. They simply purchase dairy and livestock producing companies all over the world. That's how they purchase information. That's how they purchase knowledge. We see it also in the wine and beer industry very extensively. When we develop policy, we also need to understand the public good, actually, of the orphan sectors. And that will require action. And one of the pushes forward is to expand, when you look at the bioenergy, the biorefining, to expand to the bioproducts. You want to expand to the bioproducts, you want to create more value. And that is a very important expansion because this economic value is what will create an industry that might be able to move towards a commercial framework and become commercial and produce. Orphan industry, orphan product, that means there are no byproducts. It's by itself. So there is a need for public sector, there is a need for NGOs, and they need to fill this gap. They need to create the incentives for private effort and public investment. And again, this is work that David has been doing for a long time. We want to develop mechanisms that enable further development of technologies, and we need to support that in developing countries. And BRAPA is a great example of a successful public entity that creates value and knowledge in Brazil. However, we need to be cautious when we develop regulation. And history is full of examples where regulation basically became more costly and actually achieved the alternative of what we wanted to achieve. The history of wine resulted in prohibition and bans. The same is true for GMO, cigarettes, tobacco, illicit drugs. Regulation is affected by political consideration, uncertainty about risk, and loss aversion. Heavy regulation, and that is again work of David and others, has showed that heavy regulation results in more concentration, more market power to those that are actually producing the good. So we should be cautious of that. Regulation and their cost of delay also prevents introduction of health improving traits. And this again has a big cost. There are papers by authors from the audience talking about the golden rice and the impact of not adopting it. There's a big price there, and we need to make others aware of it and understand it. Attitude and perception, and this is a topic that will be towards noon tomorrow. Early afternoon, we'll discuss about it. about new innovation, we do face resistance. It may actually increase the duration, or it may take longer to overcome and may take longer to adopt the technologies, even though we see only value in it. But attitude and perception might become a huge barrier to it. Belief, perception, and political economy are major drivers that we need to be aware of. It can lead to bans, it can lead to restrictions. And that was true in the old bioeconomy, it's also true in the new bioeconomy. Also, the role of the public institutions, of the bigger institutions, the military, is a very important player in these spheres. Not only as a big investor in the technology, but also as an entity that might impact the barriers to regulation. By doing testing by the military, it basically reduces the barriers that the commercial aviation fleets will face. And we have numerous examples basically pointing to these outcomes. So this is what this conference will try to do. It will try to convey a lot of this information, and we added a panel at the end by a broad spectrum of people coming from different parts that investigate these topics to kind of try to understand what did we learn. And this is what we're trying to learn, and I'm hoping that the panel will help us understand it further. This will be at the end of the second day. So just to conclude, agriculture is much more than food. It's much more than food because of the technical and knowledge that has been created by biological sciences. So the whole the problem of low farm income suggests the need for new sources of income. The bioeconomy provides that. The bioeconomy increases product mix of farming system. The bioeconomy is likely also to shift jobs to rural areas. But we should always remember, and again, this is an argument that David makes very strongly, we should always remember food is first. We can't simply forget about food and move forward. Transitions can become very bumpy. But transitions are transitions. We need to remember that. But we also need to try to understand the implication as we are trying to transition to a more sustainable bioeconomy. To reach a sustainable outcome via the bioeconomy, key to the story, we think, we're coming from that science, from social science, so we see that more than other parts of the bioeconomy, but it's sound policies and institutions, knowledge and development sharing, finance of innovation and development, environmental trade and technological regulation, as well as integrated ag, energy, and environmental policies. And we'll have people talking about many of these topics as we move along, more so towards the end of today and tomorrow. So this is kind of an overview, David's overview, I helped him put it together, of the bioeconomy, as well as kind of an overview what this conference is trying to understand better, or what topic this conference is trying to investigate further to understand them more. And that's it.